Chant and dance as much as possible in this human form of life.
Om Ajnanathimiranthasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitham Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya-manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadhamayyam Dadati Swapadantikam Gurave Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tadbhaktaya Namo Namaha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deva Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadhi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vancha kalpatarobhyasya kripa sindhobhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna. So I welcome each one of you all back to our discussions from the point where we left off last week. We'll be continuing from the point where we left off. So just to give a rough idea for those who are not there and also for those who are there, it's always good to have a quick summary of what we discussed last week. So basically last week we were speaking on the glories of the town of Sri Khanda, where different associates of Gauranga Mahaprabhu appeared, and if not appeared, at least settled in this province of Sri Khanda. We started off our discussion by the life of Sri Mukunda Dasa or Sri Mukunda Sarkara, and as to how he remembered Krishna so much that just by looking at a peacock feather, he fell flat to the ground remembering the Supreme Lord. Then we also discussed about his illustrious son, that is Raghunandana Thakura. And as far as Raghunandana is concerned, we discussed as to how the Supreme Lord Gopinath came down from the altar to eat from the hands of Sri Raghunandana. And then to wrap up our discussion, we spoke briefly about Abhiram Thakur. We spoke as to how Abhiram Thakur was intrigued and was curious and had this desire to meet Raghunandana Thakur after hearing this episode of the Supreme Lord eating from the hands of Raghunandana. So Abhiram Thakur, who was living in the neighboring village called as Kanakula Krishnanagar, he walked all the way to meet Raghunandana. And we wrapped up our discussion by saying how Abhiram Thakur and Raghunandana were so excited to meet each other that when they were dancing, when they were embracing and dancing with each other, the nupur from the feet of Raghunandana, it fell far. It didn't fall 1 feet or 2 feet, but it fell at a distance in a neighboring village, and it formed a kund, which presently is called as the Nupur Kund, because it was formed by the nupur of Raghunandana's dancing. So this is a rough, quick overview, a 5-minute overview of what we discussed last week. For those who are not there, we can definitely go back and watch the video as to what we discussed in detail. But right now, we will continue our discussion on the glories of the town of Sri Khanda. So as we know, Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, when he comes down to this world, that is when his associates also come down. And it is very fascinating to know that Gauranga Mahaprabhu doesn't come down in every Kali Yuga. Once in 1,000 cycles. So once in 1,000 Kalis, which means we have Satya, Treta, Dwapar, and Kali. This is one cycle. So once in 1,000 cycles does Gauranga Mahaprabhu appear to the world. So the Dwapar in which Krishna appears, the subsequent Kali is when Gauranga Mahaprabhu appears. So that is why this Kali is called as Dhanya Kali, or the fortunate Kali, because this is the Kali when Gauranga Mahaprabhu has appeared. And we are so fortunate that this appearance of Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu took place only 500 years back. That is why it is said we are very fortunate. Why? Because it was 500 years back, and to add on to it, this happens only once in 1,000 years. So we are extremely fortunate to be in the current of Gauranga Mahaprabhu and the associates. We say when it comes to Krishna, we say Krishna appeared 5,000 years back. Oh, Ramchandra, he appeared yugas back, a lot of time back. But in the case of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, we say Mahaprabhu appeared only 500 years back. So we are extremely fortunate to be in the association of the followers and the associates of Gauranga Mahaprabhu. And Sri Khanda is one such province where many illustrious associates of Gauranga Mahaprabhu appeared. So, as I said, last week we discussed about Mukunda and his son Raghunandan. But yes, so last week we discussed about Mukunda and his son Raghunandan Thakur. And the Bhakti Ratnakar also describes in further. The Bhakti Ratnakar says that there were three brothers, Mukunda Sarkar, Madhava Sarkar, and Narahari Sarkar. Now, just a small asterisk, a small caution. There will be multiple names in our discussion, especially in this class, because the pastimes of Gaur Lila and Gaur Parshad are such that there are so many names that keep coming in. So it is a very humble suggestion. If we have a book and a pen, we can definitely write down what we are discussing. Then it makes absolute sense. Even if there are multiple names, if you have a book and pen, then we will be able to join the dots at the end of the class, and it will be easier to understand. So that's a small suggestion from my end. If you have a book and pen, we can definitely do that. So what I was saying was there was Mukunda Sarkar, Madhav Sarkar, and Narahari Sarkar, three brothers. And the son of Mukunda Sarkar was Raghunandan, which we discussed last week. So we will not be touching on that. But these three brothers were so illustrious and so close to Gauranga Mahaprabhu that Mahaprabhu always cherished the association of all the three brothers. And when it came to giving instructions, we see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu always gave instructions. He gave his wonderful advice to all his associates, who then documented it and gave it to us. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when it came to Mukunda Sarkar, Mukunda was a grahastha. He had a wife and he had a son. So he was a family man. So when it came to giving him advice, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he said that collect material wealth, at the same time collect spiritual wealth. Because for a grahastha, both are required. Both are of paramount importance. So for Mukunda Sarkar, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, collect material wealth because you're a grahastha, while at the same time also collect spiritual wealth. But when it came to his son, Raghunandan, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, oh Raghunandan, my advice to you is you should do deity worship. Because Gopinath reciprocated to your love, that is why my advice to you is you should be doing deity worship. And finally, when it came to Narahari Sarkar, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, oh Narahari, my instruction for you is you should preach and be in the association of devotees. As much as possible, give out this message of Sri Krishna. So be in the association of sadhus, have sadhu sangha, give out sadhu sangha, and at the same time also preach the cult of bhakti. This is the brilliant contribution, dear devotees, of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, where a grahastha, a brahmachari, a small child, they all come together with this aim of serving Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And this is why it is called as Daivi Varnashram, where people from different ashramas come together in the hope, in the aspiration of serving Gauranga Mahaprabhu. This is exactly what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, in the chapter 9th chapter, the confidential knowledge. Text 27, Krishna says, Yat karoshi yadasnasi yajjuhoshi dadasi yat tapasyasi kauntaya tat kurushva madarpanam. Krishna tells Arjuna that, my dear Arjuna, whatever you do, whatever you think, whatever it is, do it as an offering to me. Whatever you do, do it as an offering to me. And this is precisely the mood and instruction that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave all three of them, Mukunda, his son Raghunandan, and Narahari Sarkara. Do something wherein your mind is attached to the lotus feet of Krishna. Dovetail all your activities to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. So in this way, Narahari Sarkara, as we discussed, who was the brother of Mukunda Sarkar, Narahari Sarkar later on became the Diksha Guru, the initiating spiritual master for Raghunandan. So the brother of Mukunda, that is Narahari, becomes the Diksha Guru for Raghunandan Thakur. The pastimes of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, they are so beautiful and so wonderful. Srila Gaur Govinda Maharaj, in his lectures, he would say that the pastimes of Gauranga Mahaprabhu are Adbhuta Madhurya, Adbhuta Karunya, and Adbhuta Vadanya, or Adbhuta Audarya, which means they are supremely sweet, Adbhuta Madhurya, and they are Adbhuta Karunya, they are supremely merciful, and Adbhuta Audarya. So they are sweet, very dear to one's heart, and at the same time very, very, very merciful. And just like Gauranga Mahaprabhu is very merciful, his associates equally have this same mood. Whenever Krishna comes down, his associates also come down with him. And likewise, when Gauranga Mahaprabhu comes down, the same associates come down to serve the Supreme Lord. So in the case of Narahari Sarkar, it is said Narahari Sarkar was a Braja Gopi by the name Madhumati Sakhi, very dear associate of Radha and Krishna. So when Radha and Krishna come down in one form as Gauranga Mahaprabhu, that same Madhumati Sakhi or Gopi comes down in the form of Narahari Sarkar. Now Narahari Sarkar was so exalted that he had a very wonderful disciple by the name Lochan Das Thakur. So Lochan Das Thakur becomes the second disciple of Narahari Sarkar. Initially, we said that Raghunandan was the disciple of Narahari. Now we are saying that Lochan Das Thakur was another disciple of Narahari Sarkar. And it's very fascinating to see the life story of Lochan Das Thakur. Lochan Das Thakur, when he was very small, he actually got married. When he was less than probably 10, because in those days you had child marriages. Now, even though it's abolished in most places, but still in rural India, we find child marriage is still prevalent. But in the olden times, that was a norm that the parents would get the children married, and once they turn adult, then they live together. So the marriage is taken place, but till the time they don't turn adult, they live at different places, and once they turn adult, they come back and live together. So Lochan Das Thakur, when he was less than 10, he was married off, and then later he took initiation from Narahari Sarkar. So when he took initiation from Narahari Sarkar, he was serving his Gurudev all the time. 24 hours a day he was serving Narahari Sarkar, to such an extent that he even forgot that he was married off, because so much Guru Seva was taking place that it washed away all the previous impressions. So now when Lochan Das Thakur turned an adult, when he turned 18, the father of the girl, he wrote a letter to Narahari Sarkar. And he said, your disciple, Lochan Das Thakur, has been married off to my daughter when they were like very small. And now they have turned adult. So it is my desire that both of them come together and live a proper Grahastha life. So my dear Narahari Sarkar, if you so instruct your disciple, then he may return and spend his life with my daughter. So when Narahari Sarkar saw this letter, he immediately told his disciple Lochan Das Thakur that I think you should go back and live with your wife because you have got married to her. So it is not appropriate to leave her because you have entered into an ashram when you were small. So it is your right to take care of her. So because it was the instructions of Narahari Sarkar, Lochan Das Thakur, who was the disciple, he decided to go back. So when he was going back, because it has been so many years that he had been to that village, he practically forgot the whole geography. Everything was like topsy-turvy for him. So he was looking around and things had like completely changed. And to add to it, there was no Google Maps. There was no Alexa. There was no Google Wi-Fi. There was none of these things. So there was no way Lochan Das Thakur could know where to go, whether to go left or whether to right. There was no "Hey Alexa." So at that time he was walking, and in a secluded area he saw one female. He saw one Mataji who was taking water from a well. So when she was taking water from a well, Lochan Das Thakur approached her and he said, "Oh mother, oh Maya, I want to go to such and such address. Can you please tell me where the address is? Because I am coming to this village after quite some time. So only if you could tell me the exact address, I can go to this place." And when she saw the address, she said, "Oh, this is such and such place. So you have to go straight, take a left, and in the interjection, you will find this address." Now, when Lochan Das Thakur heard this, he gave his obeisances and he went to that address. And when he knocked the door, the father of the girl opened. And when he opened the door, he saw Lochan Das Thakur and he was excited. And at that time, Lochan Das Thakur said, "Where is your daughter? I have come to take your daughter along with me." So when the father heard this, he said, "Only if you can wait for 5 minutes. My daughter has gone out. So in another 5-10 minutes time, she'll be here. And then you can take her with you." So Lochan Das Thakur said, "Okay, no problem, I'll wait." And he was waiting outside and he was doing his rounds. He was chanting. And at that time, a lady walked to this house. And the father said, "Oh, Lochan Das Thakur, she is my daughter." And when Lochan Das Thakur saw, he was perplexed. He was scratching his head. And he thought to himself, and he also told the father, he said, "I cannot be with her. I just addressed her mother 10 minutes back." Interestingly, the lady who was pulling out water from the pond happened to be his wife. But because it had been a lot of years, he couldn't recognize her by her face. So Lochan Das Thakur told the father that, "I am sorry. I know I got married to your daughter, but I'm extremely sorry. In my heart, I have considered her like my mother. So how can one get married to his or her own mother?" And this is actually right as far as Vedic culture is concerned. The other day I was hearing Srila Prabhupada in one of the lectures. Srila Prabhupada was saying that Vedic culture means one considers everyone his mother except his wife. Except leaving the wife, everyone is one's mother, irrespective of age. Whether one is young, whether one is old enough in age, whoever he is or she is, one will always consider her as his mother, except one's wife. And this is Vedic culture. And this is exactly the mood that Lochan Das Thakur carried. When he saw this Mataji, he naturally addressed her as, "Oh mother." And that is the reason in our devotee circles, we always say, "Oh Mataji, Hare Krishna Mataji, Hari Bol Mataji." We address everyone as mother. So in this way, Lochandas Thakur, when he addressed her as mother, he ended up convincing the father that, "Oh father, I have considered her as my mother in my heart. So I'm extremely sorry. I understand your sentiments, but I'm extremely sorry. I'll not be able to be with your daughter." And because Lochandas Thakur was very eloquent in his speech, he ended up convincing the father. And the father said, "Okay, no problem. You can again go back to your Gurudev. I will find another groom for my daughter." And in this way, Lochandas Thakur somehow convinced, and he went back to his Gurudev and he narrated the whole story. And now, dear devotees, the most interesting part is, as we know, Chaitanya Charitamrita was composed by Krishnadas Kaviraja Gosvami, and Chaitanya Bhagavat was composed by Vrindavana Thakur. Krishna Lila Bhagavat Kahe Veda Vyas, Chaitanya Lila Ravyas, Vrindavana Das. The Veda Vyas, who wrote all the Vedas, including Bhagavatam, he again came down as Vrindavan Das Thakur to write Chaitanya Bhagavat. Krishna Lila Bhagavat Kahe Veda Vyas, Chaitanya Leela Vyas, Vrindavan Das. So the Chaitanya Leela was written by Vrindavan Das Thakur, who was non-different, who was an incarnation of that same Vyasadev. And finally, Chaitanya-mangala, another very authoritative, bona fide documentary on the life of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, was written by Lochandas Thakur. Lochandas Thakur, the exalted disciple of Narahari Sarkara, wrote a very famous commentary on the life, a documentary on the life of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu called as Chaitanya-mangala. And the icing on the cake, dear devotees, is this scripture, Chaitanya-mangala, probably the first ever recorded document on the life of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, was written in this town of Sri Khanda. Sri Khanda Dhama ki jai. In this town of Sri Khanda, Lochandas Thakur first wrote Chaitanya-mangala, and that place is still present. The place where Lochandas Thakur sat and wrote down the whole of Chaitanya-mangala, that place is still present. So the next time we get a chance to go to Sri Khanda, this is up on the list. This is something that we should be hankering to visit, the place where Lochandas Thakur wrote the Chaitanya-mangala. In that same province of Sri Khanda, there was a very famous devotee and a very powerful associate of Gauranga Mahaprabhu by the name Damodar Sen Kaviraj. As I said, there will be a few names, so it is again my suggestion to write down if possible, so that we understand the flow. So in that province, there was another associate by the name Damodar Sen Kaviraj. And Damodar Sen Kaviraj was extremely scholarly, extreme scholar. But even after being so scholar, he was very humble in his nature. He was always in the background. He was always unassuming. Never in the limelight. He was always in the background. So once it so happened that a Digvijay Pandit, a scholar, came to the town of Sri Khanda. We see in the pastimes of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, in many instances we find a Digvijay Pandit is coming to challenge different people. The most famous probably is that of Keshav Kashmiri, where he came to challenge, and Nimai crushed him to pieces, literally smashed him to pieces. Another instance is when a Digvijay Pandit came to challenge Rupa and Sanatan, and Jiva Goswami smashed him to pieces. And this was the third instance where a Digvijay Pandit came to the town of Sri Khanda. And when the locals, they saw this Digvijay Pandit, they all stepped back, because no one was so eloquent and no one was so in depth in scriptures. So they all stepped back and they said, "We cannot fight you." But they went to Damodar Sen Kaviraj and said, "Oh Kaviraj, your name is Kaviraj. You're the king of all the poets. Why don't you battle this Digvijay?" If you battle this Digvijay, then you can establish the supremacy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings. So, oh Damodar and Kaviraj, we, the residents of Sri Khanda, it is our heartfelt desire that you go and battle or you debate with this Digvijay Pandit. So then Damodar and Kaviraj, he came forward. And when he came forward, he told the Digvijay Pandit, actually, I don't know anything. They are simply exaggerating. Actually, I don't know anything. I have not studied any scriptures. I don't know any Shastra. But they somehow have put me ahead. So please do not mind. I actually don't know anything. And the Digvijay Pandit said, oh, no problem. You've come ahead. Let us have a battle. And then Damodar Sen Kaviraji again said that, oh scholarly Digvijay, oh Digvijay Pandit, please do not mind if you lose this battle, because I do not want to battle you. You yourself have come to Sri Khanda, and the town Vasis, they want me to battle with you. So please do not mind if you lose this battle. And the Digvijay Pandit said, yes, no problem. Many times people say the same thing, but no one has been able to defeat me. He was extremely overconfident. It's good. It's a good thing to be confident, but it's another thing to be overconfident. And invariably, it's always seen someone who's overconfident. He always is smashed into pieces. Wherever there is pride, there is a fall. There's a beautiful saying. So the battle between Damodar Sen Kaviraj and this Digvijay Pandit began. And within a few days, Damodar Sen Kaviraj literally smashed and crushed this Digvijay Pandit into pieces. And Digvijay Pandit had no arguments to substantiate his points, because Damodar Sen Kaviraj was so scholarly, he literally crushed him to pieces. And even after defeating him, Damodar Sen Kaviraj said, I am extremely sorry. As I said earlier, I did not want to fight you, but the town Vasis of Sri Khanda, they urged me to fight. I am extremely sorry. Please forgive me. But you see the mood, the quality, the characteristic of ego is the more it is fueled, the ego simply increases. There is a very nice Sanskrit Subhashit Mala, a nice verse in Sanskrit. It doesn't come from the scriptures, but a very nice saying in Sanskrit. It says, Upadeshai murkhanam prakopayana shantaye paya pana bhujanganam kevala vishavardhanam. The example is given that of a snake. Snake inherently is very venomous. But if someone goes to the snake with the hope of giving some water or giving some milk, the poison of the snake doesn't decrease, but that only increases the poison of the snake. So someone is trying to do something good to the snake, but the quality of the snake is it doesn't accept the good, but it only sees the bad. The poison increases. So similarly, Damodar Sen Kaviraj was trying to pacify this Digvijay Pandit because he was humiliated when he was defeated by Damodar Sen Kaviraj. But the quality of ego is the more someone gives good advice, the ego simply increases. Paya pana bhujanganam kevalam vishavardhanam. The quality, the best quality of ego or the best quality of a fool is whenever you give him a good advice. This is one barometer, one yardstick to see who is a fool. Whenever you give a good advice to a fool, the fool will never take it. You give a good advice, he will always say, yeah, I know him. I know that. I know this. I know that. I know this. You see, many times we have heard this from different people. Whatever we speak, they say, yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know this. Yeah, I know this. Ye pata hai, wo pata hai, ye pata hai. I know everything. There is nothing that we don't know. So this is the characteristics, the quality of a fool. Prakopaya na shantaye. He doesn't become shanta, but in fact, the venom simply increases. So now when the Digvijay Pandit got so angry, he cursed Damodar Sen Kaviraj. He said, because you humiliated me in front of so many people, oh Damodar Sen Kaviraj, I curse you. And the curse is, may you not have any sons. It is my curse to you that you will never have any son in your life. And when Damodar Sen Kaviraj heard this, he was crying. He told the Digvijay Pandit, "Oh Sadhu, what is my fault? You came to the town of Sri Khanda to battle, and I initially told you that please do not mind if you lose the battle. And at that time, you were completely fine. And now that you have lost the battle, you are cursing me. What is my fault in this? I never came to you for a battle. You came to my province for a battle." But the Digvijay Pandit was very adamant. He said, "That is my curse. May you not have any son as Prayaschitta." Now, this was too much for Damodar Sen Kaviraj because he had just got married. So he fell at the feet of Digvijay Pandit and said, "Please do something. How is it that I will not have any son? Please, I beg of you, please try to take back your curse." So when he cried, when he shed tears, that is the time when the Digvijay Pandit, his heart melted. The tears of Damodar Sen Kaviraj melted the hard heart of the Digvijay Pandit. And he told Damodar Sen Kaviraj, "Even though you will not have any son in your family, I bless you. You will have a daughter. But that daughter will give birth to pure Vaishnavas. So your desire will not be fulfilled by your son, but it will be fulfilled by your grandson." So in this way, when the curse was not taken back, but when a blessing was given, Damodar Sen Kaviraj later, he gave birth to a daughter by the name Sunanda. And this lady Sunanda, the daughter of Damodar Sen Kaviraj, was so innocent and so naive and so gentle and so noble that she attracted everyone. Her qualities were such that everyone was inspired by her devotional practice. And naturally, when she increased in age, when she turned an adult, Damodar Sen Kaviraj was looking for a suitable match so that he can get Sunanda married. And at that time, Damodar Sen Kaviraj found out a very beautiful boy by the name Chirajivan. And Chirajivan was equally very handsome, very intelligent, very scholarly, very noble, and very, very, very devotional. So it was a perfect match between Chirajivan and Sunanda. So Chirajivan and Sunanda, they both get married. So just to reiterate, we have Damodar Sen Kaviraj, and Damodar Sen Kaviraj's daughter is Sunanda. Sunanda now gets married to Chirajivan, and now Sunanda and Chirajivan give birth to two sons. If you remember, the Digvijay Pandit, he told Damodar Sen Kaviraj that your desire will not be fulfilled by your son, but your grandsons. So exactly what happened was the daughter Sunanda and Chirajivan, they gave birth to two sons. The name of the first son was Ramchandra, and the name of the second son was Govinda. So Ramchandra and Govinda were the two sons of Sunanda and Chirajivan, which means they were the grandsons of Damodar Sen Kaviraj. And now this Ramchandra is the same personality who Narottam Das Thakur, in the famous song of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu, Daya Koro More. In that famous song, we find at the end, Narottam Das Thakur, he says, Daya Koro Shri Acharya, Prabhu Srinivas, Ramachandra Sangamange Narottama Das. Very beautifully, Narottam Das Thakur has written. He says, Daya Koro Shri Acharya, Prabhu Srinivas, Ramachandra Sangha Maghe Narottama Das. Who is that Ramchandra who Narottam Das Thakur is begging to have association? It is this Ramchandra who is the grandson of Damodar Sen Kaviraj. And even Ramchandra was so scholarly, because you always find a like father, like son, or like grandfather, like son. So the grandfather Damodar Sen Kaviraj was very scholarly. Likewise, Chirajivan was very scholarly. And Ramchandra was also very scholarly, to such an extent that when Jiva Goswami saw him for the very first time, he was so impressed by his scholarly ability that Jiva Goswami gave him the title of Kaviraj. So from that day on, his name was not Ramchandra, but it became Ramchandra Kaviraj. Many places we find this name, Ramchandra Kaviraj. So Jiva Goswami awarded this title of Kaviraj to Ramchandra. And likewise, we find even for Krishna Das, we find Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami. This title of Kaviraj for Krishna Das was awarded when he wrote the beautiful literature Govinda Lilamrita, the pastimes of Govinda. That is when the Vaishnava Samaj, Vaishnava community, they gave the title of Kaviraj Goswami to Krishna Das. So he became Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami. And likewise, in this example also, Ramchandra was given the title of Kaviraj by Narottam Das, by Jiva Goswami, I'm sorry. So from Ramchandra, he became Ramchandra Kaviraj. Now this Ramchandra Kaviraj was the disciple of Srinivas Acharya. In our previous discussion, we just skimmed through the surface of the life of Srinivas Acharya. So Srinivas Acharya was so exalted, his glorious disciple was Ramchandra Kaviraj. So at this point, I want to just put a bookmark. Keep this puzzle in the back of your head. And right now, I want to take you all to the era of the 6 Goswamis. So put a bookmark at this place, because we will be speaking about the 6 Goswamis and then again join the dots back to this place. So this is a bookmark. So now I want to take you all to the era, to the generation of the 6 Goswamis. As we know, there were 6 Goswamis in Vrindavan, and every Goswami was known for his contribution to the teachings, to spread the teachings of Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu. Srila Rupa Goswami, who is the fountainhead of our Sampradaya, was taught by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu for 10 days at Dashashwamedha Ghat in Prayag. For 10 days, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he gave his heartfelt effusions to Rupa Goswami at Dashashwamedha Ghat in Prayag. So for those who want to go in depth about this, this comes in the 19th chapter of the Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi-lila. A whole chapter is described on the teachings that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave to Rupa Goswami. And then comes Sanatan Goswami. Or even for Sanatan Goswami, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructed him. For 30 days at Manikarnika Ghat, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructed Sanatan Goswami. And this comes in the 20th chapter of Adi-lila Chaitanya Charitamrita. The reason I'm giving references is if we want to go home and if you want to check the discussion that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had with Rupa and Sanatan, then these are the chapters where it is elaborately described by Kaviraja Goswami. So Rupa Goswami was instructed for 10 days at Dashashwamedha Ghat in Prayag, and likewise Sanatan Goswami, his brother, was instructed for 30 days at Manikarnika Ghat. And now, because they were instructed so much by the Supreme Lord Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, Sri Sachinandan Gaura Hari, they naturally started writing books so that the later generation can avail this teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Rupa Goswami, from whatever he heard from Gauranga Mahaprabhu, he wrote books like The Nectar of Instruction or Upadeshamrit or Nectar of Devotion, which is also called as Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Rupa Goswami also wrote Stava Mala. He also wrote Ujjvala Neelamani, and so on and so forth. He wrote many books this way, Lalit Madhav, Vidagd Madhav, etc. And likewise, Sripad Sanatan Goswami, after hearing from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu for 30 days, he wrote the most celebrated work of Brihad Bhagavatamrit. He also wrote the commentaries to Bhagavatam called as Bhagavad Toshini. And he also, along with Gopal Bhatta Goswami, he also wrote Hari Bhakti Vilas. So in this way, Rupa and Sanatan wrote all these literatures. And then we have Jiva Goswami. Jiva Goswami, he wrote the famous Shat Sandarbha, the 6 Sandarbhas, Bhakti Sandarbha, Preeti Sandarbha, etc. So on and so forth. So he wrote 6 Sandarbhas, which are called as Shat Sandarbha. And then we have Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. Now, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami did not write anything, but he was again so deep in his spiritual practice that the speciality, it is said, of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami is that he could chant every verse of the Bhagavatam in 6 melodies. Every verse of the Bhagavatam, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami could chant in 6 melodies. Now, when we open a Bhagavatam, we can hardly even remember one melody. And that also sometimes it goes off tune or off beat. So it's a challenge when it comes to chanting verses of the Bhagavad Gita or Bhagavatam or even Chaitanya Charitamrita. But Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was so brilliant, and he had this ability that every verse he could chant in 6 melodies. And finally, Raghunath Das Goswami. Raghunath Das Goswami also wrote many books. He was living on the banks of Radhakund for 45 years after Mahaprabhu departed. And he also wrote many books like Dan Keli Kaumudi and he wrote Manashiksha. He wrote Manashiksha and Vilapa Kusumanjali. Dan Keli Kaumudi was the work of Rupa Goswami. So in this way, we see all the 6 Goswamis in their best of their abilities, they wrote different books. And all these books were the teachings that they assimilated from Gauranga Mahaprabhu. So whatever Gauranga Mahaprabhu instructed them, whatever teachings that the Lord gave them at different instances, they assimilated, they digested everything and wrote down in the form of these beautiful books. And now, the most interesting part. At that time, there was no printing press. There was no Bhaktivedanta book trust. There was no BBT. Right now, we find we go outside, we want to print something, we want to Xerox something. It's so easy. To such an extent, we don't even have to go outside. Almost every house has a printer and a Xerox machine. It has a scanner. But now we are talking about 500 years ago, in the past. There was no question of Bhaktivedanta book trust. There was no question of printers. There was no technology. There was no technology, absolutely. So now the question arises, how did they write books? And how was it even preserved? Because if we are having nectar of instruction, nectar of devotion, that means it was preserved and that means it was written. But how was it written if there were no pages? How was it even preserved when there are no printing presses? How did people even get the books? It's very fascinating. These 6 Goswamis wrote all the books, but they did not write it on paper. They wrote it on palm leaves. The palm leaves the leaves that we find outside, these 6 Goswamis wrote all the books on palm leaves because there was no paper, absolutely. All these books, dear devotees, nectar of instruction, nectar of devotion, all these books were written on palm leaves by these Goswamis. Sitting under different trees, they would write. And now after it was written on the palm leaves, now the question arises how to preserve them. The writing part has been done. How do we preserve them? So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave the instructions. Rupa Goswami and the other Goswamis wrote it down. But now the question was to preserve, the humongous task of preserving these literatures. And for this reason, after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Nityananda Prabhu, Advaita Acharya, they all departed. To preserve these books, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Nityananda Prabhu, and Advaita Acharya, they again reincarnated in partial expansions. I repeat, after the Lord departed and after the Goswami written these books had to be preserved. These palm leaves had to be preserved so that the later generation can get it. And for that reason, dear devotees, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Nityananda Prabhu, and Advaita Acharya again came down in partial expansions. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came down as Srinivas Acharya. Srinivas Acharya, whom we have been discussing all the while, is a partial expansion of Gauranga Mahaprabhu. Shri Srinivas Acharya ki jai. And likewise, Shri Nityananda Prabhu, Avadhuta Shiromani Nityananda Ram, Nityananda Prabhu incarnated in a partial expansion in the form of Narottam Das Thakur. Shri Narottam Das Thakur ki jai. And finally, Advaita Acharya, he incarnated again in a partial expansion as Shyamananda Prabhu. So Srinivas, Narottam and Shyamananda were the partial expansions of Chaitanya, Nityananda and Advaita Acharya. The Lord is so merciful, so compassionate that first he comes down, gives the teachings, and then later, after teachings are written down to preserve them, he again comes down. How merciful, how compassionate. That is why in the start we said Gauranga Mahaprabhu's Adbhuta, Audarya, very merciful, very compassionate. So he again comes down in the form of Srinivas, Narottam and Shyamananda, that is Chaitanya, Nityananda and Advaita Acharya. Now, all three of them were so devoted and so scholarly that their job was preserving these books. So now what they did was to preserve these books, because now there are no printing press, there is no Xerox, there is no scan, there is no CAM scanner, there is no PDF scanner, there are none of these apps. There's no app store, there's no Play Store, there is nothing. So there is no technology. So how do we preserve these books? So all three of them started copying it word by word, verse by verse, page by page, chapter by chapter. Everything was handwritten, it was copied again, all these books, so that we have multiple copies to give out. Nectar of instruction, nectar of devotion, and so many other books in the form of Hari Bhakti Vilas and Brihad Bhagavatamrita. Humongous, voluminous books, but they were all handwritten word by word. Why? So that practicing devotees like us have something to hold on to, so that we know why Gauranga Mahaprabhu came down, so that we know what were the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. If Srinivas, Narottam and Shyamananda had not come down, we would have not had these books. Because Gauranga Mahaprabhu spoke and Rupa Goswami and other Goswamis wrote. But we are separated by time. It happened 500 years back and in 1400s and 1500s. And now we are in 2020. So these books were preserved. The credit for preserving these books and distributing these books, these three personalities were doing door-to-door preaching. They would knock at every door and they would distribute these books. So they're given the credit for being the first ever book distributors in Gaudiya Sampradaya. The first ever book distribution party was the trio of Srinivas, Narottam and Shyamananda. Most of the book distribution was done by them. Now it's very fascinating. Just to give a brief idea, Narottam Das Thakur was the son of a prince, was the son of a king, I'm sorry. So he naturally was a prince. So his father was a king and he was the son of the king, which means he was a prince. And Narottam Das Thakur, he appeared in the present day of Bangladesh, east of Bengal. So at that time, there was no partition. The whole partition took place in 1947 between India, Pakistan, and 1960 between India and Bangladesh. But that time, everything was India. There was no India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Everything was one. Even Sri Lanka, it was all one place. So Narottam Das Thakur, he was a prince and he appeared in the present day Bangladesh. And when he grew up, as we know, to advance in bhakti, the most important limb is sadhu sangha, while at the same time, a most important limb is to accept a spiritual master, to accept Sri Guru. Adav Guru Padashray. Rupa Goswami says in Nectar of Devotion. The most important limb for advancing in bhakti is taking shelter of the lotus feet of Sri Guru. This is important for every single jiva who wants to advance in bhakti. Without Guru, we have no connection to Krishna. Krishna doesn't even look at us if we don't have a Guru, because Guru is the via medium who connects the jiva to the Supreme Lord. So now naturally Narottam Das Thakur was in search of Guru, and then he got to know about Lokanath Goswami. So he came to Lokanath Goswami and begged Lokanath Goswami that, my dear Lokanath Goswami, kindly accept me as your very very own disciple. And Lokanath Goswami was so humble. He said, I cannot accept you. I do not have any disciples and I am not qualified to accept anyone. So Narottam, I am extremely sorry. I understand your heart. I understand your sentiments, but I am extremely sorry. Please forgive me. I cannot accept you as my disciple. And Narottam Das Thakur, when he heard this, he was very strong. He was very firm. Unlike most of us, or at least speaking of myself, when we are rejected by Sri Guru, we naturally then say, okay, this Guru rejected me. Then, okay, I will go to some other Guru. But we find in the life of Narottam Das Thakur, even in the life of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they were so strong and so firm to such an extent. It is said Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, when Gaur Kishore Das Babaji initially rejected, he said, no, I will not give you initiation. Saraswati Thakur almost went to the ocean to commit suicide. And when Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj got to know, he said, what did you do? Why did you plan to do this? And Saraswati Thakur, he said, oh Gurudev, in my heart, I have accepted you as my disciple. And now if you don't accept me, I have accepted you as my Gurudev in my heart. So I'm your disciple. But if you don't accept me, then what is the use of my existence? What is the purpose of my life? Better I go and commit suicide. So that is when Gaur Kishore Das Babaji heard this, his heart completely melted and he accepted Saraswati Thakur. So likewise in this example also, when Narottam Das Thakur initially was rejected, as we all have heard this story, Narottam Das Thakur for one whole year, he cleans the urine and stool of Lokanath Goswami in incognito. He doesn't go out and boast in front of everyone saying, oh, look at me. I am cleaning the stool and urine of Lokanath Goswami. I am so humble. You should fall at my feet. No boasting, no exaggeration, nothing. In incognito, he would do some menial service for his Gurudev. And he did this for one full year. So Lokanath Goswami, after one full year, he thought to himself, I think it is time to find out who is doing this. And when Lokanath Goswami hid behind a bush, one day he saw it was Narottam Das Thakur who was cleaning with his own hands the stool and urine of Lokanath Goswami. And when Lokanath Goswami saw this, he jumped from the bush outside and said, Narottam, why are you doing this? Why are you cleaning my stool and urine? And when Narottam Das Thakur heard this, he said, oh Gurudev, you rejected me. You do not accept me as my disciple. So I want to do some menial service. And this is the only menial service that came to my mind. My dear Gurudev, please kindly accept me. So when Lokanath Goswami heard this, he immediately accepted Narottam Das Thakur. So the Narottam Das Thakur that we discussed, who was a partial incarnation of Nityananda Prabhu, is the disciple of Lokanath Goswami. And similarly, Srinivas Acharya is the disciple of Gopal Bhatta Goswami. And now Gopal Bhatta Goswami needs no introduction because it was because of his bhakti, because of his bhajan, that the Damodar Shila turned into Radharamanji. It turned into Radharaman Lal. Even Vrindavan, when we go, Radharaman is the most, perhaps the most famous temple in the whole of Braj Mandal. Radharaman and Bake Bihari. So this Radharaman deity appeared from the bhajan of Gopal Bhatta Goswami. That's why in Vrindavan they very nicely they chant. They say, Jai Jai Radha Ramana Hari Bol, 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 Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Jai Jai Radha Ramana Hari Bol, Jai Jai Radha Ramana Hari Bol. Sri Radha Ramana Lal Ki Jai. So Radha Raman Lal came from the bhajan, the bhakti of Gopal Bhatta Goswami, and Srinivas Acharya, who is the partial incarnation of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, was the disciple of the most exalted Gopal Bhatta Goswami. And now finally, we spoke about Advaita Acharya coming in a partial expansion as Shyamananda Prabhu. Now it's very interesting, the life of Shyamananda Prabhu. When he appeared, his name was Dukhi, D-U-K-H-I, Dukhi. Why? Because before he appeared, all his brothers and sisters, they all died right when they were born. Either there was miscarriage or immediately after their birth, they died. Just like we find in the pastime of Krishna, all the 6 children were killed. Likewise here, all the children before him, they all died. So when the parents gave birth to him, they gave him the name Dukhi, because after all, he's going to bring us only Dukh, because in another few days, he's also going to die. So what is so happy about it? What is Sukhi in it? Instead, we give him the name Dukhi, because he's going to bring us only distress. So his name was given Dukhi. And it's so fascinating that he was given the name of Dukhi, and on parallel lines, there was another personality who was walking near Khatwa. Khatwa is the place where Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyas. And this place of Khatwa is not very far from Sri Khanda. So we see we are again boiling down to the same province of Sri Khanda. So there was one person who was walking near this town of Khatwa, and that was the time when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was actually taking sannyas. So when he got to know that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Shachinandan Gaurahari, Gauranga Chandra is taking sannyas, the moon like Gauranga Mahaprabhu is taking sannyas, the black curly hair of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu will no longer be present. He will now have a shikha, and he will have a danda in his hand, and he will wear saffron. So when this personality heard and he saw all this, his heart was palpitating. He had horripilation and tears in his eyes. And he was constantly chanting, Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Shri Krishna Chaitanya. Why? Because this was the name that was given to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu when he took sannyas, Shri Krishna Chaitanya. This is the sannyas name of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, Shri Krishna Chaitanya. So he was constantly chanting Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Shri Krishna Chaitanya, to such an extent that people gave him the name Chaitanya Das, because he was always chanting Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Shri Krishna Chaitanya. People gave him the name Chaitanya Das, and he was famous all over as Chaitanya Das. So once it so happened that this Chaitanya Das was traveling around, and he came to one province, and he was sitting under a tree, and he was chanting his round under a tree. And in that same village, there was another person who was worshipping Gaura and Nitai, who was worshipping the deities of Gauranga and Nityananda. So he was showing the incense. And when he was showing the incense, 4237, 4237, 4237, outside his house, there was a tamalshas Harinam Sankirtan. So just to reiterate again, we were speaking about Chaitanya Das, who got the name after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's sannyas. He was so enamored, and it was very heart-wrenching for him, so to say, that he was given the name Chaitanya Das. And that Chaitanya Das later came to one town, and under a tree he was chanting his rounds. And in that same town, there was another person who was doing 4237, showing the ghee lamp and agarbati to Gauranga and Nityananda in deity form. And outside his house was tamalshas Harinam Sankirtan of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. There was tamalshas Harinam Sankirtan. And naturally, Gaur and Nityananda Prabhu and Gauranga Mahaprabhu, when they heard this, their ears were going towards Harinam Sankirtan. Nitai and Gauranga, they both nudged each other. And they said, well, here this devotee is offering incense, 4237, but our heart is going for Harinam Sankirtan. Because the two lords have come down to give this process. Ajanu lambita budau kanakavadhatau sankirtanai kapitarau kamalaya takshau vishwam bharau dvija bharau yugadharma palo vande jagat priyakaro karunavataro. these two brothers, Gauranga and Nityananda, whose hands extend up to their knees. Ajanu lambita budo kanakavadathau. Their hands extend up to the knees. These two brothers have come down to flood the world with the process of Harinam Sankirtan. That is the only aim of Gauranga and Nityananda. And naturally, the yoga dharma for this age is Harinam Sankirtan. So Nam Sankirtan is the life and soul of Gauranga Mahaprabhu. And naturally, in this case, when Gauranga and Nityananda in deity form, when they heard the Sankirtan outside, they both nudged each other and they said, what should we do? Should we stay here and accept the agarbati, or should we go out in Nam Sankirtan? And Nityananda Prabhu told Gauranga Mahaprabhu, I don't know about you, but I am definitely going there. I don't want the ghee lamp and the agarbati when Nam Sankirtan is going on. I want to go to attend and dance to the Nam Sankirtan. And Nityananda Prabhu held the hand of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and both the lords from the altar, they ran outside. And just imagine the plight of this devotee who is showing the agarbati. He was showing 4237, and here it is. He sees the two lords are running from the altar, and they're going outside. And this devotee took a stick and is running behind them. Hey, come back! Come back! Where are you running? I have accepted you in my heart. I am doing agarbati. I am showing ghee lamp, and where are you all running? Come back! Come back! Come back! And now Gaur and Nityananda, when they see that their pujari, their very dear devotee, out of love is taking a stick and running behind them, just like Mother Yashoda ran behind Krishna. Similarly, here in this case, a pure devotee is running behind Gaur and Nityananda. That doesn't mean that we follow it. Does it apply to us? We follow the path of Vaidhi Bhakti. We follow proper rules and regulations. But this is on the platform of Rag. This is on the platform of attraction, where there is too much mamata, too much attraction, genuine, spontaneous, loving devotion to Gauranga and Nityananda. So when the lords, they saw this stick in his hand, he was completely, the two lords, Gauranga and Nityananda, were flummoxed, and they didn't know where to go. So at that time, they decided to jump into a heart of a devotee who was sitting there. And who was that devotee? Oh, well, that devotee was none other than Chaitanya Das, whom we discussed. The two lords, Gauranga and Nityananda, they jumped into his heart. And immediately there was a flood of ecstasy in his heart, because Gauranga and Nityananda, the two lords, Radha and Krishna in one swarup and Balaram Prabhu in one swarup, have entered his heart. And he became so ecstatic that from Chaitanya Das, his name became Hridaya Chaitanya, because in his Hridaya, in his heart, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu jumped. The two lords jumped into his heart to save themselves from that devotee who was running with a stick. So in this way, Chaitanya Das was given the name of Hridaya Chaitanya or Hridaya Chaitanya Prabhu. Shri Hridaya Chaitanya Prabhu ki jai. And now, this Hridaya Chaitanya Prabhu was the guru or the spiritual master of Shyamananda Prabhu or Dukhi, whom we discussed at the start. Dukhi, that Dukhi took initiation from Hridaya Chaitanya, and after initiation, his name became Shyamananda. So this was the history of Srinivas, Narottam, and Shyamananda. To reiterate, Srinivas Acharya took his initiation from Gopal Bhatta Goswami. Narottam Das Thakur took his initiation from Lokanath Goswami, and likewise, similarly, our Shyamananda Prabhu took his initiation from Hridaya Chaitanya Prabhu. So you see, all three of them had different gurus, but they all unanimously studied under Jiva Goswami. So their Siksha Guru was Jiva Goswami. They all studied from Jiva Goswami, but they had different gurus in the form of Gopal Bhatta Goswami, Lokanath Goswami, and Hridaya Chaitanya Prabhu. So in the earlier part, I said to keep a bookmark because we'll be coming back. So now is the point we're again coming back. We're joining the lines. We're drawing parallels back to that bookmark. The Srinivas Acharya whom we discussed now was the guru Srinivas Acharya is the guru of Ramchandra Kaviraj, whom we discussed in the beginning. Ramchandra Kaviraj, who is the grandson of Damodar Sen Kaviraj. That Ramchandra Kaviraj was the disciple of this Srinivas Acharya. So this is the connection. So I wanted to explain the whole thing, because otherwise if I just say that Srinivas Acharya was the guru, then we may superficially understand. But I wanted to go in depth to explain what the connection is. So that Ramchandra Kaviraj was the disciple of Srinivas Acharya. And what was the relation of Srinivas Acharya and Ramchandra Kaviraj? Oh, it is said it was like one body, two bodies, but one soul. They were so close to each other, so close knit, that externally it was two bodies, but internally it was one soul, very close to each other, very affectionate to each other. Even though it was guru-disciple relationship, but still they were very close to each other. And it's so fascinating that when Ramchandra Kaviraj was getting married, he was getting married, and in India there's the custom where the groom sits on the horse. There's a ceremony where when he's going to the bride's house, he generally sits on the horse. Generally, it's found in the north part of India, may not be in the south part of India, but it's prevalent in the north part of India. So Ramchandra Kaviraj was in that way. He was going to his his wife's house, because he was just about to get married. And at that time, Narottam Das Thakur and Srinivas Acharya, they were seeing this procession. And Srinivas Acharya was talking to Narottam Das Thakur and saying, "Oh, look at him. He has got male form. He has got a human birth. And he is wasting by getting married, because now if he gets married, he's going to get entangled. And once he gets entangled, there's no question of Krishna Bhakti, because it's just one loop after another loop after another loop after another loop. So it's just entanglement after entanglement." So Srinivas Acharya was telling Narottam Das Thakur, look at his plight. He's getting married. What about his Krishna Bhakti? This is exactly the point that Srila Prabhupada told Bhakti Charu Maharaj when Maharaj joined. Srila Prabhupada told Bhakti Charu Maharaj that just this life, give it to Krishna. Make sure that you are not involved with any women. Don't have any connection with women. But this one life, give it to Krishna. And if this one life you give completely to Krishna without having connection with any opposite gender, then you will definitely go back. And following the instructions of Srila Prabhupada, Bhakti Charu Maharaj did exactly the same thing. He did not deviate even a single inch from the instructions of Prabhupada. So likewise here we find Srinivas Acharya was telling Narottam Das Thakur, they were just talking to themselves that look at Ramchandra Kaviraj. He's getting married and he's going to get entangled. What will happen to him? Human life is so rare, especially male birth. Of male birth gives the opportunity to advance quickly and faster in the path of Krishna Bhakti. And this process is such that it should be started not from the fag end of life, but from very early childhood. Fag end of life is the time when we can't see, when we can't hear, when we can't walk, when we can't talk, when our hands become completely invalid, when we become completely vegetable. Is that the age when we are going to hear and chant about Krishna? No, that is definitely not the age. We don't prepare. If you have to give an IIT exam or an SAT exam or any of those exams or GRE exam, we don't prepare for it one day before, right? We prepare for it at least 1 year in prior. We give multiple exams and then we go and get good marks. And likewise, in this exam called as death, we don't prepare in the old age, but we prepare from childhood. We prepare just like for exam, we said we prepare for 1 year in advance. Likewise for human life, death is the exam and we prepare from the childhood. That is why Prahlad Maharaj says, Kaumaram acharit pragyo dharman bhagavatam iva durlabam manusham deha. 761 Bhagavat. This human life is durlabham manusham deva. It is extremely rare, very, very, very rare to get. So he says, Kaumaram acharit pragyas. That is the reason. Start bhakti from childhood. Don't wait till the fag end of your life when bodily problems will make you impossible to perform bhakti. Time is now, need is enormous. As Indra Prabhu would say, Jiva Jago. Don't wait till the fag end of life. So this was the point. Very strongly, Srinivas Acharya was telling Narottam Das Thakur. And what happened was Ramchandra Kaviraj, he heard this conversation. Now, when he heard this conversation, his heart, he was in a fix. He didn't know what to do, because whether to get married or whether to hear to what Srinivas Acharya had said. So what happened was he got married. He went to his wife. And that same night he told his wife, this is what I heard from Srinivas Acharya. I am sorry, I'll have to leave. You go your way, I go my way. I have to go to Srinivas Acharya. And the wife, she was also, it is said, she was so humble and so chaste when she heard this. She said, oh, Ramchandra Kaviraj, you should actually go, because the aim of human life is Krishna Bhakti. If that is where your heart is going, then you should go. Don't worry about me. Krishna will maintain me. Don't worry. So she was very cooperative. This is the fastest ever Vanaprastha that has ever taken place in just one day, probably less than 1 day. So Ramchandra Kaviraj got married, and that same night he went back to his guru, Srinivas Acharya, and he told Srinivas Acharya the whole thing, that I heard your conversation and I want to surrender my life to you. So when Srinivas Acharya heard this, Srinivas Acharya, he said, well, it's good that you want to surrender your life to me, but there are some rules and regulations. There are some protocols. My advice, my very humble suggestion to you is you should be going back and live with your wife at least for 3 days and 3 nights. Live with her for 3 days and 3 nights, because you have got married, and then you can come back to me. So Ramchandra Kaviraj agreed. Then he again went back to his wife. And when the wife saw Ramchandra Kaviraj, she said, oh, I thought you went to Srinivas Acharya. What happened? And then Ramchandra Kaviraj, he started narrating the whole story. But the wife was so understanding. She wasn't sarcastic. She didn't say, oh, you came back? Actually, you should have come 1 year back. Oh, why did you even come? You should have not even come. So she wasn't sarcastic in her dealings, but she was very inquisitive. She said, oh, why do you come? Ideally, you should be with Srinivas Acharya. So after explaining the whole situation, Srinivas Acharya and Ramchandra Kaviraj and his wife, for 3 days and 3 nights, they were discussing Hari Katha and Hari Kirtan. For 3 days and 3 nights, they did not sleep, they did not eat, and full on absorbed in hearing and chanting about Krishna. So from that we can understand it's not only Ramchandra Kaviraj, but also his wife, who was equally very exalted. And after 3 days and 3 nights, he folded his hands and told his wife, that is the end of our marriage. I am going to my Gurudev Srinivas Acharya. And he went to Srinivas Acharya. Now this is very interesting. The other day, I was hearing in one of our ISKCON congregations, when one devotee, he wanted to become a brahmachari. So when he wanted to become brahmachari, naturally the family had opposition, because he was very qualified, very scholarly. So when he told his family that he wants to become a brahmachari, the family weren't devotees. They were non-devotees. So it was a culture shock for them. It was a thunderbolt to their heart after seeing their child so educated to become a brahmachari, to become a monk. So it was a culture shock for them. So now this devotee was trying everything to convince his parents and relatives, but it wasn't just working. And it's always in familiarity breeds contempt. I mean, whatever we speak, if there's too much of familiarity, generally the message is never taken seriously. So what this devotee did was he called an expert preacher to his house, because he wasn't able to convince his parents, his family relatives. So he called an expert preacher to the house. And when the expert preacher was called, this preacher did not say anything, but he just said one line. And this one line was so powerful. This preacher said, actually, in the pastime of Prahlad Maharaj, it is said that if one person becomes a devotee in the family, then about 21 generations get liberated. And actually, this is a fact. It's said in the pastime of Prahlad, because Prahlad was a devotee, his father Hiranyakashipu got liberated. So if there is one pure devotee in the family, 21 generations gets liberated. That is the power of bhakti. So now this preacher just made this point. He said that in 7th canto, this is what Prahlad Maharaj says, that if one person in the family becomes devotee, everyone gets liberated, irrespective of whatever they have done. So when the family members heard this, the mama who was opposing this devotee to become a brahmachari, he came ahead and he said, good, keep on chanting till your last breath. Make sure you never leave the chanting of the holy name, because when you chant the holy name, we are going to get liberated irrespective of whatever we are doing. So make sure till the last breath, you're always chanting. Never leave your brahmachari. And that preacher, very famous devotee, I wouldn't want to take names, but very famous brahmachari preacher, he was saying that this is how he convinced his family, by saying that if one person becomes a devotee, the whole family gets liberated. So likewise here also, we find Ramchandra Kaviraj was so exalted, but also his good wife was equally very exalted. So Ramchandra Kaviraj, after 3 days and 3 nights, he went back to Srinivas Acharya. And after going to Srinivas Acharya accepted him as his very noteworthy disciple. But what happened was, after 3 days and 3 nights, when he went back, when he entered into the ashram, Narottam Das Thakur was also there in that ashram. He saw Ramchandra Kaviraj, and with that same broom which he was using to sweep the courtyard, with that same broom, he whipped Ramchandra Kaviraj thrice. And he said, you have spent 3 days and 3 nights with your wife, and you're coming here to the courtyard of Srinivas Acharya. You are very contaminated. You are very polluted. Please go back. Take a bath and become a little pure and come back. So Ramchandra Kaviraj agreed, and he again went back. And after some time, when Narottam Das Thakur was massaging the body of Srinivas Acharya, so when he was massaging the body, in the back of Srinivas Acharya were 3 marks, 3 red lines on his back. So when Narottam Das Thakur saw this, he asked Srinivas Acharya, oh Srinivas Acharya, what happened? How did you get 3 lines? What happened to you? So Srinivas Acharya, when he heard this, he said, Acha, very nice. In the morning you beat me, you whipped me, and now you're saying what happened? So Narottam Das Thakur was scratching his head and said, Srinivas Acharya, when did I whip you? I never whipped you. So Srinivas Acharya said, did you whip anyone? Think, did you whip anyone? And at that time, Narottam Das Thakur said, yes, I whipped Ramchandra Kaviraj, because for 3 days and 3 nights, he was living with his wife and he's very contaminated. And he was coming here to our ashram. So I asked him to go back and purify himself by taking bath in some holy river and then coming back. So when Srinivas Acharya heard this, he said, my dear Narottam, please understand that Ramchandra Kaviraj, for 3 days and 3 nights, he was not engaged in any material activity, but for 3 days and 3 nights, he was speaking about Krishna. He was chanting the names of Krishna. He was completely absorbed, remembering and chanting the holy names of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. My dear Narottam Das Thakur, Ramchandra Kaviraj was absorbed in remembering Krishna. And that is the reason when you whipped him, it was as if whips on my back. So that is why I got all the whips, because the Guru always is embracing the disciple. He's always protecting the disciple. Just like in the pastime of Haridas Thakur, we find when Haridas Thakur was whipped, in the Mahaprakash Lila, Gauranga Mahaprabhu showed his back, and Gauranga Mahaprabhu had all the whips. And Mahaprabhu explained how he had embraced Haridas Thakur in all those whips. And likewise here, Srinivas Acharya had embraced his disciple, Ramchandra Kaviraj. So when Narottam Das Thakur heard this, he felt very bad that he had whipped Ramchandra Kaviraj. So, dear devotees, Ramchandra Kaviraj and other devotees like Mukunda and Raghunandan and Narahari Sarkar and Lochan Das Thakur, who wrote the Chaitanya-mangala, Damodar Sen Kaviraj, whom we discussed, all of them were living in this province of Sri Khanda. So it was a complete explosion. One self-realized devotee this side, another self-realized devotee that side, another self-realized devotee this side, another self-realized devotee this side. So all the places, ito devotee, parato devotee, everywhere there were devotees, and all Shuddha Vaishnav, all self-realized Vaishnavas. So it was a complete explosion, Sri Khanda. And to add to that, there were traveling guest speakers, guest speaker Prabhujis like Abhiram Thakur, Srinivas Acharya. They were all living outside of Sri Khanda, but they would also come to visit. So they were guest speaker Prabhujis. So it was a complete explosion, Sri Khanda. And Gauranga Mahaprabhu, the mood that he carried, the same mood was carried by all these associates who were living in Sri Khanda. So we offer our very humble obeisances to all these associates, right from Mukunda, whom we discussed earlier, Mukunda, Raghunandan, Narahari Sarkar, Lochan Das Thakur, his disciple, Damodar Sen Kaviraj, and then Sunanda, and then Sunanda's husband Chirajivan, and then their two sons, Ramchandra Kaviraj and Govinda. And then we also discussed about Srinivas, Narottam and Shamananda. So Srinivas, Narottam and Shamananda, of course, were not in Sri Khanda, but they had strong connection to the associates, to the residents of Sri Khanda. So in this way, we beg to all the Sri Khanda Vasis, to all the associates of Gauranga Mahaprabhu at Sri Khanda, to kindly shower their mercy and their glance upon us, so that in some day, in some lifetimes, we can also become an associate of Gauranga Mahaprabhu and offer our service to the lotus feet of Gauranga Mahaprabhu and also to these illustrious associates of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Having said this, I would humbly want to stop here. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Sri Khanda Dhama ki jai, Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Premanande, Hari Hari Bol.